On the Track is a web TV show about cryptozoology, natural history, green issues and whatever else the team feel like making up as they go along. Enjoy!
So what do we have in this episode, Mr. John?
Well, Hennis, we have something very special for you this week. We start off by going over to meet our old friend Glen Vaudrey, who's going to tell us all about the CFZ BHM Study Group, what it is, how it works, and how you can get involved. And then we're going back to Canada to once again meet the lovely Carol Scott and hear more about her book about the mystery animals of Oceania and Southern Asia. So there's a lot for us here this week.
I really like the old credits.
Well, Jeff, we've got some special guests on the show today, haven't we? Aye, that we have. We've got a pop group, and they come from the south. They're called the Shandy Drinkers, and they're going to be performing their new hit single, A Taste of Baby Sham.
I think it's admirable the way that young mongoose spends most of his time underlying racial stereotypes. Well done to everybody involved. Well, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name's John Downs, and welcome to another episode of On the Track. As regular viewers will know, every Wednesday evening at 6:30 and every Saturday afternoon at 3 o'clock, we bring you a mélange. I'm saying mélange because I still think it sounds big and clever to be European, and I've had enough of saying potpourri. A mélange of stuff about hard science, weird shit, and what was it again? Oh yeah, surreality. And if you don't know what surreality is, maybe this helps, or maybe it doesn't. But now it's time to get on with the show, and first of all, I want to introduce you to an old friend of ours, a very valued friend and colleague, Mr. Glen Vaudrey. First of all, Glen, tell me about the CFZ BHM Study Group.
The CFZ BHM Group, the Big Hairy Monster Group, is growing fast. So far, the most successful group growing this year. Looking into any big hairy monster sighting around the world. Welcome to all who want to join in, looking at anything vaguely big, hairy, or mysterious. With updates from around the world, from as far as Australia, right through to Vancouver, right up at the other end of the world.
I think it's probably time for us to put to death the story that we're not interested in people who cite British BHMs. I mean, I've seen one, for goodness sake. We're not anti them. We just want them to be studied in a responsible and civilized manner.
Yeah, there's currently a big falling out within the British Bigfoot community from those who are doing serious research and those who are just basically making shit up.
Well,
It's
there
probably the nicest way and easiest way of putting it. There is a distinct link between those who are seriously investigating sightings. And like all in good investigations, they're not going to say what it is before they look. They're going to look and then produce the findings. There is, like I said, a person well known within the community who has a very different opinion to that, who's been causing all kinds of trouble within the British Bigfoot community to a point where they're starting to make it look laughable, which research is far from laughable because there is something being cited. What it is, we don't know. Is it a flesh and blood hominid? Very, very unlikely. As we know from recent research into Neanderthal, it would appear that mankind doesn't kill off its resident other hominids. It make love, not war. Shagged out of existence long ago.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, before we get on with our next guest, I think I should really give you a bit of an explanation as to what's going on. As many of you are probably aware, I have problems with my feet. I keep on injuring them totally by accident. And as has happened every winter for the last 3 or 4 winters, I have injured them again. But for the first time they are now seriously infected. I have blood poisoning, and I am, and have been for the last week or so, quite seriously unwell. I went to Bideford Hospital in Abertram Road yesterday, and for the first time it is actually being discussed that I may well end up having to have one or both legs amputated. This, I think, goes without saying, is something I really don't want to happen. And I'm doing my best to be brave about it, but this is something that I am dreading. So, in the last few weeks, things have not been quite as running according to plan as they usually do. And unfortunately, for example, on Wednesday, the show that I actually uploaded was the same as the one on the week before, rather than the one it should have been. And I am not functioning very well. I will continue to do these shows because I enjoy them. I enjoy filming them, I enjoy performing in them, and I enjoy putting them together. In fact, at the risk of sounding melodramatic, it's probably the thing I enjoy in my life most these days. But please, ladies and gentlemen, as and when things go wrong, please forgive me. However, something before we get on, I just want to say a big thank you to Graham, who's been looking after me magnificently. But you can see that he used to be the roadie in John Downes and the Amphibians from Outer Space, because when they put the new dressing on my foot yesterday, it turned out to be so bulky we couldn't put my shoe on. And we were faced with the problem of how we were going to get me out of my wheelchair in the car park of the hospital and into my car without putting my feet on the ground. This obviously was impossible. So Graham did what every good roadie could do, and he found a little plastic bag and a roll of gaffer tape, and he gaffer taped the plastic bag to my foot. And later on this evening, with the help of Dr. Archie, he made my plastic right foot even more waterproof and stable. Adopt, adapt, improve, and make it up as you go along with a damn good bodger.
It's the CFZ way. And now I want to take you back to the second part of my conversation with the lovely Carol Scott, in which we're talking about her new book about the mystery animals of Oceania and Asia. And you may remember from last week that we were talking about the mysterious story of the Nitawo, or Nitaweo. I always thought it was Netaweo, but I think Carol's right, it's Nitawo of Sri Lanka. It's something that interests me a lot, and also Richard Freeman, who, I don't know if you know Richard, but he's an old friend of mine, and he's currently in Sumatra looking for the orang pendek.
Oh, awesome.
The story of the tribes people driving a whole population of cryptids into a cave and then setting fire and suffocating them. That also, the same story comes up on Flores for the semi-mythical creatures, which many people are equating with Homo floresiensis. And I wonder, I'd love to know how far back these stories go, because I'm sure I've heard a similar story somewhere in Malaysia. And it's wonderful how the same stories turn up for totally different geographic areas. And I think it tells us a lot about the way that folklore travels, and also tells us quite a lot about human behavior. If we can find out which of these stories came first, it'll tell us quite a lot about the way the trade routes work between Sri Lanka and Indonesia, and a lot of that sort of human behavior. So yeah, I agree with you totally. The important thing is to preserve the information, preserve the knowledge, and therefore it's available for future generations of researchers to be able to do stuff with. So with your book, what sort of area, what's the big geographic area it covers?
Yeah, basically all of Asia, including Russia, Japan, India, China. Those are the big ones, of course. And all of Oceania. So there's New Zealand, there's Australia, there's, a million islands, and just covering, as well as the seas, the megalodons in there. There's a couple different sea monsters, and just covering that whole area. Like I mentioned earlier, a lot of those cryptids don't get a lot of attention, and just, again, there's kind of, they're not in my backyard and not as easily accessible. I'm sure, especially with Mr. Freeman traveling all the time, it's expensive to go to other places. It's a lot easier just to go. I used to live in Texas, and there would always be Texas Bigfoot hunts, and maybe like an hour away at most. And being, doesn't cost a lot. I didn't have to get airfare. Versus going and researching elsewhere, Asia, Oceania, that's a lot more money. And Africa as well, too. And I that's actually something I noticed, was that a lot of, there's a fair amount of cryptids in the area that basically all their research is funded by young Earth creationists. The Ropin's one that's coming into mind, and it's just because there's a lot of money kind of in those circles that can go, oh yeah, we want to prove this, and it kind of helps our theory. And like that's the kind of thing that gets funding. So it's just, kind of just looping back to the point. Again, it's just very easy to research Sasquatch or like even going to Scotland isn't cheap, but the Loch Ness Monster is in a densely populated area. And versus, the thylacine. No one wants to really fly out to Australia, and then you got to take a boat to Tasmania, and then you got to drive around to all the forests, and that's costing you thousands of dollars before you even book accommodations or anything. And it's just very, I get the bias, and I not really using bias in a negative sense here, just trying to bring attention to those cryptids. Again, there's probably people who could do better research than I did on the book, just, pure honesty. And people who can find the original manuscripts on stuff, or can go talk to people and say, hey, do you know, have you ever seen the Yeti or something like that, and be able to collect that information. And I kind of want to I wanted to make the book a starting point in that regard. So someone can look at it and say, oh, I'm very interested in this, and I've never heard of it before, but I want to dig in even deeper. So that was basically the central focus of the book.
Okay, say that I can wave a magic wand, send you to anywhere in the world, so you could dig deeper into a particular cryptid, and I go whang, and so you shall, with my conceptual magic wand. Where would you like to go? Where would you go?
Probably Tasmania. Again, I love thylacines, even as a non-cryptid entity. I just think they're so cool, and I would love for them to still be alive and, kick in the Tasmanian forests. So, I would love to, just go to Tasmania, search around for them. In terms of being able to really find something, I think the cryptid with the best chance out of the entire book to exist and still be alive would actually be the orang pendek. So I'd love to go on a trip there, investigate there, see if what we dig up, So those would be my answers.
Those are the two that I would say are the most likely to exist.
Mm-hmm.
But it's just such a big, wonderful world out there. There's so many places that if I could still walk properly, that I would love to go.
Yeah.
So at the moment I'm restricted to places that are fairly flat, that somebody can push me in a wheelchair. But there are places like that. There are places like that on my bucket list. So what's your next project?
I actually don't have one lined up. Just I guess I'm just gonna see how this book, kind of fares in the community. See, maybe something really sparks my interest, and maybe I might even follow up on I've already forgotten how to pronounce it.
Nitaweo, I think.
Nitaweo.
But that's just the way I've always pronounced it. I don't know if that's true either. But Nitaweo seems about right.
Yeah, because I actually did my undergraduate degree in political science with a focus on genocide studies. And, so that was kind of what caught my interest with that whole story was, this historical account and, very underreported genocide. And it brought me back to the Neanderthal genocide theory, which is the theory that early humans committed genocide against Neanderthals, which isn't proven. So I can't go too much into it, and I just thought that was very interesting because it was kind of combining something that I had studied a lot with, something that was, cryptozoology's kind of always been in my life. So honestly, I would love to do a long form piece on that. Not really sure what direction to take. The chapter's probably the longest one in the book just because I found so much and I wanted to include it all. And, I think if I had to pick a next project, it would be something regarding that.
Well, to be quite honest, if you
hooked up with your researcher in Sri Lanka, at the very least, you could go out there and digitize all the journal stuff before it disappears.
Yes, yeah.
And somewhere up in the mountains, there's probably, if the story is true, there's a cave full of bones.
Mhm.
And if you could find that cave, job done. You've done, that would be absolute the holy grail, wouldn't it?
Yes, yeah.
If you want to support us and help us make more content like these, please press like, subscribe, follow our Facebook page and check out our Patreon.
And as the ghost of Joe Strummer, who's an ever more regular visitor to my little studio, wants me to remind you, always press the notification bell. Otherwise you won't be told when there's a new show to watch. And that would be an awful pity, wouldn't it? Well, ladies and gentlemen, here we are at the end of another episode. I want to say a big thank you to everybody, but for whom I would not have been able to put this show together. First of all, a big thank you to Graham, who's not only the Deputy Director of the Centre for Fortean Zoology and has been for the last 26 years, but he's an old friend of mine, and he's also my carer. And at the moment, as my body is falling apart faster than usual, he has a hell of a lot of caring to do, and I'm very, very grateful for you, old friend, and I can't thank you enough for everything. I want to say a big thank you to my producer, Louis, who's an absolute darling and whom I am very fond of. And I want to say a big thank you to my two new housekeepers, Miss Judy and Miss Shelley, who are both darlings, and they're doing a wonderful job, and the house looks better than it has done in many years. And I want to say a big thank you to my guests this week, Carol Scott and Glen Vaudrey, and of course Richard Freeman and Barry Tadcaster, who were around earlier on. And that's about it for this episode, really. I'll be back on Wednesday, and on Wednesday we will be having the episode of On the Track Extra that you should have had a couple of weeks ago, when Richard Muirhead and I go through the latest issue of his magazine Flying Snake, and amongst other things we talk about freshwater octopuses. And then next Saturday I'll be back again, and the long-awaited last piece of Ian Squibb's voyaging around Loch Ness, doing his best to find the locations of some of the classic Loch Ness monster sightings, will be on your platter for your delectation. I owe Ian a big apology, because we filmed this some weeks ago, in fact many weeks ago, and I honestly thought that we'd broadcast it, and actually we hadn't. Total false memory syndrome, because we hadn't done anything of the sort. But it's coming out next Saturday, and so if you're there to watch it, wait for it, McCrinnan. I'll be seeing you.